I always told myself I would never open that closet, not because it was haunted or cursed or anything like that, but because it was his. The last place Jonas ever touched in our house was the hall closet at the top of the stairs. March 3rd, 1998, a Tuesday. I remember because the night before, he left his boots muddy in the kitchen again, and I'd told him, not nagging, just mentioning, that I'd appreciate it if he rinsed them next time. He kissed my forehead, said nothing, and walked upstairs. That was the last time I saw him. They said he left us, walked out, couldn't handle the weight of a family, couldn't handle the bills, couldn't handle me. But I never believed that, not fully. For 27 years, I held my breath in silence, carrying 1,000 what-ifs in my chest like stones. I raised our son Callan on my own. I packed away Jonas's shirts into a sealed box. I vacuumed around that closet door, never opened it, never knocked, until last week. That morning started like any other. I was sitting in the sunroom, knitting a scarf I'd started and abandoned a dozen times over the years. Callan walked in through the front door, holding a crumpled yellow envelope. "Mom," he said, his voice uncertain. "This came in the mail today. It's addressed to me, but it's weird." I looked at it. No return address, no postage stamp, just our address and Callan's name, written in a slanted hand. Neat, but shaking. "Maybe a prank," I said, reaching for my reading glasses. He opened it anyway. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded twice. He read the words out loud. "I'm in the walls. Dig behind the closet." We just stared at each other. I didn't speak, couldn't. My chest was tight, like all the air had been sucked out of the room. Callan slowly turned the page around and showed me the handwriting. I knew it immediately. It was Jonas's. I'd seen that same script 100 times. On birthday cards, love notes, old grocery lists stuck to the fridge with magnets. I could spot the way he curled his lowercase EG from across the room. I didn't need forensics. I knew my husband's hand. I took the letter gently, like it might tear if I blinked too hard. I could hear my pulse in my ears. My hands trembled, but I folded the paper again, just like it had arrived. I stared at the back of it like it might tell me more. Callan was pacing. "This isn't funny," he said, half to himself. "Dad's been gone for nearly 3 decades. He left. That's what they all said, right? That he ran off." I looked up at him, at his father's cheekbones, the way he clenched his jaw when nervous. He was 10 when Jonas disappeared. For years, he asked questions I couldn't answer. Then he stopped asking. Now, suddenly, he looked 10 again, lost. I stood up. "Where was this envelope?" I asked. He looked confused. "What?" "Where was it? Was it in the mailbox? On the step?" He rubbed his neck. It was inside the screen door, wedged between the handle and the frame, like someone placed it there by hand. Someone had been to our house, recently, and they knew Callan lived here now. They knew Jonas was never declared legally dead. They knew we had never sold the place, and they knew where that closet was. My mind raced. Who would send something like this? What could possibly be behind that wall? Why now? I sat back down and pressed the folded paper against my chest like I could absorb it. Callan sat beside me. "Mom," he said gently, "you don't actually think—" "I don't know what I think," I interrupted too quickly. "But I know your father wouldn't have written this if he didn't mean it." Callan nodded slowly. He wasn't ready to believe yet, but he respected my certainty. That's how it had always been. I was the one who believed. Believed Jonas wasn't a coward. Believed he wouldn't abandon his son. Believed there was more to the story. I stood again, slower this time. And for the first time in 27 years, I walked up the stairs and placed my hand on the brass handle of that old, narrow hall closet. The wood was colder than I remembered. I could still see the faint scrape marks where Jonas had once measured the inside frame. I had chalked it up to one of his DIY phases back then. But now I wondered what he'd been planning or hiding. I looked back at Callan, who had followed me halfway up the stairs. "I think it's time," I said. He didn't speak, but he nodded. And in that moment, I knew. Whatever had been buried in this house for 27 years was no longer willing to stay hidden. 1997 was the last full year I remember feeling steady. Not happy all the time, not perfect, but steady. Like I could close my eyes at night and know exactly what the next day would bring. We lived in a modest 2-story brick house in Crestfield, a sleepy little town where neighbors still waved, kids biked without helmets, and the mail always came by noon. The kind of place where time didn't move unless you pushed it. Back then, Jonas was still Jonas, not the man on the missing posters, not the question mark in Callan's childhood, just my husband. The man who loved black coffee, crossword puzzles, and making Sunday pancakes shaped like animals. He was soft-spoken, the kind of quiet you trusted. People said he looked like someone you'd cast in a movie to play a good man. And he was, at least in the eyes of others, a reliable employee at Ray's Custom Build Co., devoted dad, even helped coach Callan's little league team when work allowed. I worked part-time at the local library. I liked the rhythm of books. The order, the smell, the way stories waited patiently for someone to believe in them. I'd come home to find Jonas in the backyard, lying on the grass with Colin resting on his chest, both of them staring up at the clouds, inventing shapes. Jonas would always say, "You don't need much to raise a kid, right? Just love, time, and a roof that doesn't leak." Back then, we had all three. The nights were filled with small joys, Callan's laughter echoing from the tub, Jonas humming as he folded laundry, the click of the thermostat before bed. Evenings were our quiet ritual. Dinner at 6, dishes at 6:30, a short walk if the weather behaved. Then Jonas would sit on the edge of Colin's bed and read aloud from whatever fantasy book they were working through together. Sometimes I'd listen from the hallway, smiling as his deep voice turned dragons into bedtime lullabies. Our marriage wasn't passionate in the way movies show, not candlelit baths or rose petals on the bed, but it was steady, warm. He knew how I liked my tea. I knew when to leave him space. We argued, sure, over bills, over politics, over who left the porch light on, but it never lasted long. The truth is, I didn't notice anything was wrong. Looking back, I wonder if that was my mistake, mistaking calm for connection, assuming love stayed just because no one said otherwise. But at the time, everything felt enough. We had traditions. On Saturdays, we'd clean the house to old Motown records. Jonas always sang off-key, especially during the Temptations. Callan would dance with the broom. I'd pretend to be annoyed, but really, I loved it. Every fall, we drove 2 hours to the apple orchard. Jonas always picked the worst-looking pumpkins, claiming they had personality. We carved them together, even after Colin got older. We saved the seeds, roasted them with salt, and kept the best ones in a jar above the stove. And every winter, without fail, Jonas hung a single silver ornament, shaped like a bell, on the porch light. Said it was good luck. Said his dad used to do the same. I never asked if that was true. That was our life, simple, woven together with small rituals that felt like love. We didn't have much, but we were solid, or so I thought. The last normal day was a Thursday. Callan had just won his school's science fair, a volcano project that used vinegar and red food coloring. He was so proud. Jonas ruffled his hair and said, "You'll be smarter than both of us combined one day." He smiled, kissed my cheek, and told me to rest. He'd handle dinner. That night, we ate spaghetti. Callan insisted we light a candle because it felt like a special occasion. We laughed. We laughed a lot that night. I didn't know then that it would be the last time we ever laughed like that together. That's the trick of life before. It always feels ordinary while you're living it. You only recognize it as precious when it becomes unreachable. People talk about red flags. Looking back, they ask, "Didn't you notice anything?" And I want to scream at them, "No, I didn't, because there was nothing to notice." He didn't flinch at loud sounds. He didn't drink too much. He wasn't cruel or distant or anything the true crime shows warn you to look for. He was just Jonas, my husband, Kaylin's father, until the day he wasn't. That's what makes it so hard, grieving someone who never said goodbye. One moment you're folding laundry, wondering if you have enough eggs. The next, you're staring at a detective asking if your husband had any reason to disappear. I didn't know how to answer. I still don't. Because in 1997, my life was full of quiet comfort, soft routines, and the kind of love that didn't need big words. And I believed, truly, that was enough. But sometimes, the life you think you're living is just the surface. And what's underneath is waiting. And years later, it might crawl out in the form of a letter that says, "I'm in the walls." The first time I felt something shift, it was over a bottle of paint thinner. It was a Friday afternoon in early October of 1997. The kind of crisp, golden day where the air smells faintly of wood smoke and the sun hits the windows just right. I had taken the day off from the library. Callan had a half day at school. We were carving pumpkins out back. Jonas said he'd be home early. I remember watching Kaylin scoop seeds into a mixing bowl, his little face serious as he tried to make the perfect triangle eyes. The backyard was warm, safe. Jonas pulled into the driveway around 2:15 p.m. sharp, just like he said. But when he hugged Callan and leaned in to kiss me, I noticed it. A harsh chemical smell on his jacket. Sharp, industrial. It made my throat itch. "What's that smell?" I asked, half laughing, pulling back a little. "Paint thinner," he said casually. "Ray had me help him strip the old cabinets in the new unit. Guess it soaked in." I nodded. It made sense, kind of. Jonas worked construction and maintenance under his older brother Ray's company. But usually he changed before coming home. He was meticulous like that, always careful about what he tracked into the house. I didn't push it, but the scent stayed long after he went inside. It lingered in the hallway, on the sleeves of his coat. I set it out in the laundry room with the window cracked. That night, after Callan went to bed, I asked him again, "Did something spill on you today?" He didn't look up from his crossword. "What?" "The smell. It's still in the hallway." He blinked, then shrugged. "I told you, paint thinner. Wasn't a big deal." Then he changed the subject, asked me if we needed to winterize the garden hose. It was such a small thing, but the way he deflected, so smooth, so practiced, made my stomach pinch. That was the first flag, but it didn't feel like danger, just off. The second came a few days later. I found Jonas standing inside the upstairs hallway closet, the same one. It was Sunday morning, barely 7 a.m. I'd woken up to the sound of soft hammering and opened the bedroom door to find him inside the closet with a tape measure, jotting down numbers in a small notepad. I rubbed my eyes. "What are you doing?" He turned slowly, not startled, just quiet. He was wearing a flannel I hadn't seen before, and he looked pale, like he hadn't slept. "Thinking of adding some shelves," he said, "for winter coats." It was plausible. The closet was shallow and mostly useless, packed with old boxes and a few of Colin's forgotten school projects. But still, Jonas was not a man who made house changes without planning them out first. He was precise. He liked blueprints, sketches, tools laid out in rows. "Want help?" I offered. He shook his head. "Nah, just measuring for now." Then he gently shut the door and disappeared into the garage for the rest of the morning. That evening, I opened the closet again out of curiosity. Nothing had changed, but something was different. One of the floorboards near the back looked slightly lifted like it had been disturbed. I crouched down and touched it. It moved. Not much, but enough. I assumed he had stored something underneath. Maybe old tools, maybe cash. We didn't talk about money much back then, but I knew things had been tighter that fall. I didn't mention it. Maybe I should have. But when you love someone, your brain works overtime to smooth out what your gut tries to wrinkle. So I smoothed. Another night, I found Jonas standing in the backyard, just staring at the house. Not the stars, not the trees, just the wall near the upstairs bedroom, as if trying to see through it. "You okay?" I called from the porch. He turned too quickly. "Yeah, just thinking. Long day." He walked past me, kissed the top of my head, and didn't explain. By then, I'd started collecting little scraps of discomfort. None of them big enough to raise alarm. A late night here, a rushed excuse there. The way he jumped slightly when the phone rang. The way he flinched when Callan asked where he went during lunch breaks. I told myself it was work stress, that he was tired just like me, that we'd find each other again once the holidays came, once we had more time. But looking back now, I see it so clearly. He was folding into himself. He was building something, not just with wood or screws, but with silence, with avoidance, with the kind of fear that doesn't announce itself, but leaks through the cracks like cold air in winter. One night, I woke to find him sitting in Callan's room, watching him sleep. He didn't notice me. He was just staring. His shoulders slumped forward, hands clenched on his knees. "Jonas?" I whispered. He looked up slowly. His eyes were wet, but not from crying. He blinked and said, "He's going to do great things, no matter what happens." At the time, I thought it was sweet, maybe even poetic. Now it haunts me, because the first red flag isn't always a scream. Sometimes it's a smell, a shrug, a sentence too perfectly placed. And when you piece them all together years later, you realize the person you trusted most was already halfway gone. There was no single moment where Jonas disappeared from our life. No slammed door, no shouted words, no storm. It was quieter than that, like air slowly leaking from a balloon you didn't know how to hold. After those first strange moments, the paint thinner, the late nights in the closet, things didn't get dramatic. They got distant, and if I'm honest, that was almost worse. It started small. He stopped sitting at the table for breakfast, said he wasn't hungry, said he had to leave early, but his plate would still be there in the sink when I came home at noon. Then came the radio. Jonas always used to listen to jazz in the mornings, low and warm, like it was just there to keep the house breathing. But one day it changed. I came downstairs to the sound of static, then a harsh, low-frequency buzz I didn't recognize. He said it was just a late-night station, but he left it playing for hours, long after he left for work. The mail started piling up. He used to sort it every evening, bills in one drawer, junk tossed immediately. Now envelopes stacked on the counter, some unopened, some scribbled with notes I didn't recognize. Then came the absences, not full disappearances, just moments where he should have been there and wasn't. One Thursday, I picked up Callan from school early. He had a stomachache. Jonas's truck was in the driveway, but he didn't answer when we called for him. The garage was locked. I knocked once, twice. No sound. When I asked later, he said he'd fallen asleep inside, working on a shelf. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. The next day, Callan asked me if Daddy was mad at him. That broke something inside me. I told him no, of course not. The Daddy was just busy. The grown-ups get tired. But I didn't believe it. Jonas had stopped reading to him at night, said he had a headache, said his eyes hurt. The books gathered dust on the nightstand. Callan stopped asking after a while. I'd come home from work and find Jonas in the backyard, standing in the same spot, hands in his pockets, staring at the house. He'd go to bed before me, wake up before me. Once I woke up at 3 a.m. and found him sitting in the dark hallway, eyes fixed on the wall outside the closet. "Couldn't sleep," he said, and walked past me without touching my arm, without asking if I was okay. He was there, and yet he wasn't. That's the thing about emotional erosion. You don't notice the edges wearing down at first. You only realize it when you reach out and there's nothing left to hold on to. He still brought home groceries, still paid the mortgage, still mowed the lawn every other Saturday. But the warmth was gone. The air between us had changed. I tried to reach him. I did. I'd leave notes in his coat pocket. He never mentioned them. I made his favorite dinner: lemon roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans with garlic. He said thanks, barely touched his plate, and went straight to bed. I suggested therapy. He laughed once, bitter and quiet, and said, "You think a stranger's gonna fix what I've done?" Done? I didn't ask what he meant. I should have. The shame of it is, I started blaming myself. That's what women do when the love begins to vanish. We dig into our own skin for answers. Was I too cold? Too busy? Too tired? I searched my face in the mirror, wondering if I looked older, if I'd bored him, if I should have been more patient, more forgiving, more fun. Mavis noticed. My sister came over one weekend to help clean out the attic. She took one look at me and said, "You're shrinking, Delora." I asked what she meant. "You used to take up space," she said. "Now you float like someone who isn't sure she belongs." She wasn't wrong. I no longer played music while I cooked. I didn't water the houseplants. I stopped bothering to ask Jonas what time he'd be home, because no matter what time he walked through that door, he wasn't really with us. Even Callan started to adapt. He stopped calling him Dad and started saying Jonas when talking about him at school. When I corrected him, he just shrugged and said, "He doesn't act like a dad." That nearly wrecked me. But what could I say? We were ghosts living in a house made of routine. I stopped talking about the little things. The bump in the hall floor, the new neighbor across the street, the dream I had about my mother, who passed when I was 19. Jonas stopped asking. We became roommates, then shadows, then strangers who knew how to move around each other without ever touching. And yet, I stayed. Because when love fades quietly, it's harder to leave. You don't walk away from silence. You just learn to live inside it. At night, I'd lie beside him, eyes wide open, listening to the hum of the ceiling fan, wondering if he was awake too, wondering what he was thinking, wondering what had changed, wondering how two people could go from shared breath to separate planets without even fighting. I never got an answer. Until that letter arrived 27 years later. Until the words, "I'm in the walls," pulled me right back to those empty nights and that closet we both pretended didn't exist. It happened in front of Callan, and somehow that made it worse than if he had slapped me. We were sitting at the dinner table. Tuesday night, mid-November. The heater had kicked on for the first time that season, and the windows were fogging a little from the inside. I'd made stew, the kind Jonas used to ask for when he had long shifts. Root vegetables, beef, thick broth. I'd even baked cornbread just the way his mother used to. I was trying to bring him back with warmth and food and the kind of silence that begged for connection. Jonas barely touched his plate. Callan, who was 10 at the time, was bubbling over with excitement. He had a field trip coming up to the Science Museum and had just been moved to the advanced math group at school. He was proud, nervous, chatting too fast the way kids do when they just want to be heard. "I might get to sit with Serena on the bus," he said, grinning. "She's really good at multiplication. She helped me with decimals." I smiled and raised my eyebrows toward Jonas, silently nudging him to engage. Jonas looked up from his plate, fork in hand, and said flatly, "Son, you don't need to talk so much. Just eat." The room fell quiet. The tone of his voice cut clean. Not angry, not loud, just cold, blunt, dismissive. Callan's shoulders dropped. He looked down at his bowl. The spoon in his hand started to shake, just slightly. I froze. "Jonas," I said gently, "he's just excited." And that's when it happened. Jonas didn't even look at me. He just let out a laugh, a single sharp breath through his nose, and muttered, "Of course you'd defend him. You never did know when to shut up either." The words landed like stones thrown at glass. It wasn't the insult, not really. It was the casualness, the ease with which he said it, like it was true. Like it was always true, and he had just grown tired of pretending otherwise. Callan didn't understand the full weight of it, but he understood enough. He stood up quietly, carried his bowl to the sink, and went upstairs without another word. I just sat there, staring at my stew, steam curling upward like it wanted to carry me out of that kitchen. Jonas didn't apologize. He didn't look up. He kept eating. I don't remember finishing my meal. I don't remember washing the dishes, but I do remember sitting in the laundry room that night. The door closed, clutching a hand towel in my lap and holding it so tightly I thought it might tear. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, stunned by the realization that the man I married, the man I shared a child with, a mortgage, a bed, no longer respected me. That wasn't something you could fix with kindness. That wasn't forgettable. That night, Callan knocked on the laundry room door and opened it slowly. "You okay, Mom?" I forced a smile and nodded. "Just tired, sweetheart." He sat beside me on the dryer, legs swinging. After a long pause, he asked, "Did I do something wrong?" That's when my heart broke. "No, baby," I said, pulling him close. "You didn't do anything wrong." But even as I held him, I couldn't shake the truth of what had just happened. Not just the insult, but the fact that it came from nowhere. From someone who used to light up when he saw me walk into a room. From someone who once cried when he held Callan for the first time. And now he sat at our table and made us feel like strangers invading his space. After that night, something in me shifted. I stopped asking Jonas how his day was. I stopped waiting for him to sit with us. I stopped trying to resuscitate what had already flatlined. It wasn't a conscious decision, just a quiet withdrawal. A pulling back, like my body was trying to protect what was left of me. Jonas didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he did and just didn't care. A few days later, I found one of his boots in the trash bin. The leather was still good, but the sole had come unglued. He hadn't even tried to fix it, just tossed it. That felt symbolic. It wasn't long after that he disappeared, just like that. People say that when someone vanishes, you're supposed to hold on to hope. But what no one talks about is how many tiny goodbyes happen before the leaving. And sometimes, those goodbyes look like a husband mocking his wife in front of their child. That dinner, that moment, stayed with me. Not because it was the worst thing he ever did, but because it was the first time I realized he was no longer trying to be kind. He wasn't drifting away. He had already let go. And in that moment, I started to do the same, even if it would take years to admit it. The morning Jonas vanished, it was raining. Not the romantic kind of rain, not soft or steady, but gray and jagged, like the sky couldn't decide whether to cry or scream. I remember that detail clearly because I had just finished pouring Callan's cereal when I noticed the water streaking down the kitchen window. It was early, barely 7 a.m., and the heater hadn't kicked in yet. The house felt cold, damp. I pulled my sweater tight around me. Jonas came downstairs quietly, already dressed. Flannel shirt, jeans, work boots. His eyes were tired, his hair still damp from the shower. He smelled like the same cologne he used on our wedding day, a scent he hadn't worn in months. He didn't sit. He just stood by the sink, hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug I'd been meaning to throw out. "You're up early," I said cautiously. He nodded once, eyes on the rain. Callan sat across from me, still half asleep, dragging his spoon through the milk. Jonas looked over, watching his son for a moment too long. Then he said something that didn't fit the moment. "Make sure he wears his raincoat." I blinked. "What?" He nodded toward Callan. "Today, the walk to the bus. Don't let him forget it." I tried to smile, confused. "Of course." He set the mug down, didn't drink it. Just placed it on the counter as if he were making an offering. Then quietly he said, "I'm going to the hardware store. Need to pick up sealant for the crawl space." I remember the words exactly because they were so normal, so harmless. a sentence that could have belonged to any other day. He grabbed his keys, looked around the room once like he was memorizing it. Then he looked at me, really looked, and gave the smallest nod, and he walked out the door. It didn't hit me until 2 hours later that he hadn't taken his lunchbox, that he hadn't kissed Callan goodbye, that he hadn't said when he'd be back. By 5 p.m., I had called his phone twice, straight to voicemail. By 7 p.m., I had checked the garage, the driveway, the shed. His truck was gone. By 10 p.m., I was pacing. Callan had fallen asleep on the couch, still in his school clothes. I couldn't eat, couldn't sit, couldn't think straight. I kept replaying the morning in my head. That nod, that mug, that final look. The next day, I called Ray, Jonas's brother, and asked if he'd shown up for work. Ray barely reacted. He probably needed air, he said. You know how Jonas gets. But I didn't. Not like that. Jonas had never disappeared before. Not once. Not even after our worst arguments. He had always come home. Always. I called the hospitals. Nothing. I called the police. They took a report, asked about mental health, financial stress, marriage issues. The officer, a young woman named Detective Lena Goss, asked if he had any enemies. I laughed. Actually laughed. Jonas wasn't the kind of man who made enemies. He didn't raise his voice. He barely even honked in traffic. But something about that made her frown. After 2 days, they found his truck. It was parked near the Old River Bridge, 2 towns over, unlocked, keys inside. Driver's seat pushed back, like he'd been sitting in it for a while. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no note, just absence. They brought me in, showed me the vehicle, asked if he had any history of depression, if he might have jumped. I said no, a hard, flat number. Because for all his silence, for all his retreat, Jonas was still tethered to something. He wouldn't leave Callan. I was sure of it. But no body turned up, no witnesses, no activity on his bank account. Just like that, he was gone. People came around for a while, brought food, said things like, "You're strong, Delora," and "Kids are resilient." Ray said Jonas was always a bit fragile, you know? Maybe the pressure got to him. Mavis wanted to slap him. I could see it in her eyes. The search faded after a few weeks. By December, the police filed it as a probable voluntary disappearance. By spring, the world had moved on. But I hadn't. I didn't cry. Not in front of anyone. Because how do you cry for someone who might still be breathing? How do you mourn a man who may have simply chosen to stop loving you? There's a loneliness in that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. I had to explain it to Callan the only way I knew how. Daddy had to go away. I don't know where, but it's not your fault. He didn't ask much after that. He just stopped mentioning Jonas at all. The closet stayed locked. I didn't touch it. I vacuumed around it. Never opened it. Never asked myself why. Years passed like fog, one blending into the next, and everyone assumed I'd moved on, that I'd accepted it. But I hadn't. Because you don't just lose someone like Jonas. You get left by them, piece by piece. And even when they're gone, their silence echoes through the walls, the windows, the air. And sometimes, just sometimes, it waits. For a letter, for a voice, for someone to finally dig. Rock bottom didn't come like a crash. It came like dust. Slow, soft, barely noticeable. Until one day I realized I couldn't breathe. The first real winter after Jonas disappeared was brutal. The kind of cold that seeps into your joints and makes the floorboards groan under your steps. The radiator clanged like a warning bell. Our pipes froze in January. The gutters cracked in February, and in March, I stopped checking the mailbox. I was still functioning on the outside. I got Callan ready for school. I made meals. I went to work at the library where people gave me those awkward sideways looks. Sympathy softened by distance. I wore my wedding ring for a while, then took it off. Not because I stopped believing, but because it burned when I looked at it. It mocked me. It was the nights that were the hardest, the silence, not just the absence of sound, but the hollowness that filled the spaces where conversation used to live. The air inside the house felt heavy, like the walls were holding their breath. I kept hearing things: floorboards settling, pipes knocking, scratches behind the closet. I told myself it was grief playing tricks, and maybe it was. But the worst moment came one Sunday, about 9 months after Jonas vanished. It was supposed to be laundry day. Callan was outside kicking a soccer ball against the fence. I went down to the basement to wash our clothes, and when I reached for the detergent, I noticed something strange: a shoebox tucked behind the boiler, covered in dust and a rag. I hadn't seen it before. I would have remembered. It had Jonas's handwriting on the side, a faded black marker that read, "Receipts, 1996 to 1997. I pulled it out and sat on the cold floor, my back against the dryer. Inside were dozens of folded papers. Receipts, yes. Hardware store invoices, gas station stubs, notes on yellow legal pads. But tucked near the bottom was a photo I'd never seen. It was of Jonas, standing in front of what looked like a construction site. His eyes were squinting. The sun was too bright. And standing next to him was Ray, his brother, holding a clipboard and wearing that smug half-smile I never liked. But something was wrong. The date on the back said February 4th, 1998, a month before he disappeared. And according to Ray, Jonas hadn't been on site for weeks before he left. I stared at the photo until the edges blurred. That's when the numbness cracked open, and I broke. Not with screams, not with shouts, with silence, and tears that didn't stop. I sobbed into that cold concrete floor, hands gripping the photo like it could anchor me. It didn't. For the first time since Jonas disappeared, I let myself admit the truth I hadn't wanted to see. He hadn't been taken. He hadn't gotten lost. He had been planning something, and I hadn't been part of it. That truth shattered me. I felt stupid, ashamed, blindsided. I had believed in our marriage, not because it was magical, but because it was real. I believed love could endure silence. I believed absence didn't always mean betrayal. But what if I was wrong? What if, the whole time, Jonas was digging his way out, not trapped in? After that night, I stopped going to church. I stopped returning calls. I even skipped Callan's parent-teacher meeting, which I'd never done before. I wasn't me anymore. I was a version of myself stuck in a loop. Wake, survive, sleep, repeat. I'd stand at the top of the stairs at night looking down at the dark hallway, eyes locked on that damn closet. The same one he was measuring weeks before he left, the one I never dared open. Once I took the knob in my hand, turned it. But the hinges groaned, and something, fear, grief, rage, pulled me back. I told myself it was just a closet, but deep down I felt it. That closet was holding something Jonas didn't want me to see, and I wasn't ready to find it. Not yet. So I shut the door again and went back to pretending. Rock bottom, for me, wasn't just loneliness. It was the loss of trust. In him, in the people around me, in my own memory. People said time heals, but time didn't feel like a healer. It felt like a weight pressing down on my chest, day after day. Mavis came over one afternoon and found me sitting in the pantry, just staring. No lights, no groceries in my cart that week, nothing cooking on the stove. She knelt down and whispered, "You can't keep sinking like this." I wanted to tell her I wasn't sinking. I had already hit the floor. There was nowhere left to fall. But I didn't stay there, because even in that silence, something deep inside me, a flicker, a question, a mother's gut, whispered, he didn't leave for nothing. And if he was hiding something, then maybe he was hiding from something too. The letter came on a Tuesday. I was folding towels in the living room, one eye on the news, the other on the half-full laundry basket. The doorbell rang. A soft single chime. The kind that usually meant a neighbor dropping something off or a kid trying to sell chocolate. But when I opened the door, no one was there. Just a single envelope wedged between the handle and frame. No return address, yellowed edges. My son's name written in tight, deliberate handwriting, Callan Wynne. I called out for him. He came downstairs, his hands still wet from washing dishes. I handed him the envelope without thinking much. Maybe an old friend, a delayed birthday card, something harmless. He opened it in front of me, unfolded the page. Then I saw his face change. His eyes froze. His lips parted like he was about to speak but couldn't find the words. "What is it?" I asked, stepping closer. He handed it to me slowly. Just one line written in black ink. "I'm in the walls. Dig behind the closet." That's all it said. I stared at the words, and everything around me fell away. The ticking clock, the sound of the news, even the faint smell of detergent on the towels. All of it vanished. I knew that handwriting. I had lived with that handwriting. Grocery lists, birthday cards, the letter he wrote me before Callan was born, the one I kept in a shoebox under the bed. It was Jonas. I didn't cry, I didn't gasp, I just sat down. Callan was pacing now. He kept saying things like, "This has to be a joke," and "How could this be from him?" But I wasn't listening anymore. I was staring at that sentence like it was alive, like it could explain 27 years of silence. "I'm in the walls." What did that mean? Was it metaphorical? A threat? A warning? Or was it literal? And the second part, dig behind the closet. My heart dropped. That closet, the one he measured, the one I never opened, the one I vacuumed around, walked past, avoided, without even knowing why. I looked at Callan. His face was pale now. He was rubbing the back of his neck the way he used to when he was nervous before math tests. "I think we need to look," I said, standing up. His eyes widened. "Mom, we need to know." He nodded, hesitant but firm. Then he left to grab a flashlight and the old toolbox from the garage. I stood at the foot of the stairs, staring up at that closet door. It hadn't been opened in years. Not because it was locked, but because something deep inside me had whispered, "Not yet." But the moment had come. Callan returned. We climbed the stairs together, neither of us speaking. The house was too quiet, as if it too was waiting for whatever was about to be unearthed. The closet door creaked when we opened it. The hinges groaned in protest. It smelled faintly of dust and old wood. Inside, boxes, coats, an umbrella stand, nothing unusual at first glance. But then I remembered what I had seen all those years ago. The lifted floorboard, the uneven back panel, the space that never felt right. Callan ran his hands along the back wall. "There's something here," he whispered. He pressed against one of the panels. It shifted. Not much, but enough. He took out a flathead screwdriver and began prying at the edges. I knelt beside him, heart pounding. Every scrape of the tool against the wood felt like a heartbeat. The panel came loose in 2 minutes. Behind it, insulation, thick, dusty. Callan pulled it aside, and then we saw it. A gap, a shallow space behind the wall, barely 2 feet deep, hidden from view, dry, cold. Inside, wrapped in layers of old plastic and cloth, was a small metal box, rusted at the corners, padlocked shut. Callan pulled it out slowly and placed it on the hallway floor. We stared at it like it might explode. The lock was old. We forced it open with bolt cutters that had belonged to Jonas once. Inside the box, a stack of old photographs, some faded beyond recognition, a bundle of cash. At least a few $1,000s, a few cassette tapes, labeled in Jonas's handwriting, and at the very bottom, wrapped in a Ziploc bag, a small leather-bound journal. The moment I touched that journal, my fingers trembled. I didn't open it. Not yet. I just held it to my chest. Because that box wasn't just a container. It was a confession, a time capsule, a warning, a goodbye. It was proof that Jonas hadn't run away. He'd stayed. Somehow, for some reason, he had never really left us. I looked at Callan. His eyes were brimming now. Not quite tears, but something close. Grief tangled with rage, with wonder, with disbelief. "Do you still think it was a prank?" I asked gently. He shook his head, and together, without saying another word, we carried that box downstairs. The past had been sleeping in our walls, and now it was awake. I didn't open the journal that night, not because I didn't want to, but because I knew, once I did, I wouldn't be able to unknow anything written inside. The past would no longer be frozen. It would be alive. I needed a moment to breathe. So I set it on the nightstand next to my bed and watched it as I lay there in the dark. A small leather-bound book, brown with frayed edges. Jonas had always written in longhand, even after everyone else moved to email and type notes. He said pens made thoughts real. For the first time in 27 years, I started to believe Jonas hadn't abandoned us, that he had been trying to say something, to leave something, maybe even protect us. I slept with my bedroom light on. The next morning I made coffee like I always did, but this time I opened the curtains. Let the morning light flood in. Callan came downstairs, still quiet, eyes swollen from lack of sleep. "Do you want to read it together?" he asked. I shook my head gently. "Not yet, let me read it first." He respected that, he always did. By 10 a.m., I sat in the sunroom, wrapped in my old wool cardigan, the journal open in my lap. My hands trembled as I turned the first page. Jonas had written the date at the top, January 6, 1998. If something happens to me, this is the only way Delora will ever understand. I don't know who else to trust. I don't know who's watching. That was the first line. And with it, my entire understanding of my life cracked open. Page after page, he wrote about Ray, his brother, and what Jonas had discovered. Ray had been laundering money through his construction business, hiding cash inside fake contracts, burying equipment purchases that didn't exist. Jonas had stumbled on the paperwork by accident. He was supposed to file something. Instead, he found numbers that didn't add up. And more than that, names he didn't recognize. At first, he thought it was a mistake. But when he brought it up to Ray, he said Ray's face changed. Cold, calculated. Jonas described it like seeing a stranger wear his brother's skin. He told me to drop it, that I was too sensitive, that some things are bigger than you. That night, I came home and measured the closet. That line made my heart stop. So it had started then. Not as a project, but as a plan to hide something, to leave a trail, to carve out a piece of truth inside the house before something could happen to him. The journal went on. He suspected someone was following him. Cars parked outside work, calls with no voice on the other end. Once he said the brakes on his truck had felt soft. Too soft, but he was afraid to go to the police. Said no one would believe him, not over Ray, the town's favorite contractor. If I disappear, I didn't leave you. I didn't run. You need to know that. Callan needs to know that. I set the journal down and wept. For all the years I had spent blaming myself. For all the nights I thought I wasn't enough. For all the mornings I stared into the mirror asking what I'd done wrong. I hadn't done anything wrong. He had been trying to protect us. And the saddest part? He never got the chance to finish. The final page ended mid-sentence. No signature, just half a thought. I think Ray knows That was it. I stared at the page for a long time. Somewhere, deep inside me, something began to stir. Not rage, not even sadness anymore. It was clarity. A clean, sharp line being drawn between what I thought my life was and what it actually had been. For years, I had lived in confusion, guilt, fog. Now I saw the edges, the truth. Jonas hadn't been weak. He hadn't been cruel. He had been scared, trapped, watching shadows crawl through the walls of his own family. And yet he chose to leave this box, this journal, this sentence, for us. Because somewhere inside him, He believed we would find it, that we would find him. I stood and went into the hallway. The closet door was still open, the panel on the floor pulled back, that hollow space in the wall exposed like a wound. I crouched and placed my palm flat against the interior wood, closing my eyes. "I'm listening now," I whispered, and I meant it. That was the moment my grief became something else, not hope, not yet, but resolve. I wasn't going to live as a ghost anymore. I wasn't going to apologize for surviving. I wasn't going to forget him, or let what he left behind be buried again. I started to write everything down, notes from the journal, dates, names, questions. I went into the attic and pulled down the old filing boxes from when Jonas worked for Ray. I hadn't touched them in years. Dust poured from the lids. I didn't sneeze. I was wide awake now. I didn't call Mavis. I didn't tell Callan what I had read. Not yet. Some awakenings happen like lightning. Mine came like a slow sun rising. Soft, steady, and impossible to ignore. The past hadn't been buried. It had been waiting. And now I was finally ready to look it in the eye. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Not Mavis, not Callan, not the neighbors who still asked, now and then, if I'd ever gotten closure. Because closure, I was learning, wasn't something someone handed you. It wasn't a knock at the door or a final phone call or a perfectly wrapped explanation. Closure was something you built, quietly, brick by brick. And so I began to build mine, in silence. It started with the documents in the attic. I pulled them out box by box, labeled in Jonas's handwriting. Permits, invoices, payroll. They were dusty, curled at the edges, and dated between 1994 and 1997, years Jonas worked closely with Ray's company, years I hadn't wanted to think about, until now. I bought a scanner, set it up on the dining room table, scanned everything, one file at a time, every night after Callan went to bed. I didn't understand it all, but I saw enough to know something was deeply wrong. Duplicate invoices, fake employee names, permit applications that looked forged, and almost every paper trail pointed back to one person, Raymond Wynn, Jonas's older brother, my brother-in-law, the man who'd spoken at our wedding, the man who told me with a shrug, maybe Jonas just couldn't handle life. I began to document everything, created a folder on an old laptop I hadn't used in years, backed it up to 2 USB drives, labeled one Callan's Art Projects and the other Old Recipes, hid them in the spice rack and under the basement stair plank Jonas once fixed. I wasn't paranoid. I was careful. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt in control. That feeling, it was strange. After years of drifting through grief like fog, I was finally walking with purpose. Eyes forward, hands steady, but I didn't stop there. I visited the town archives. Crestfield was small. Its records were paper thin. I asked for property records, city permits, old zoning reports, anything tied to Ray's company. The clerk, a woman named Elise, gave me a strange look when I asked for documents from the 90s. Most of that's in storage. Why the interest? I smiled politely. Family History Project. I lost my husband in '98. Her expression softened immediately. Oh, right, Jonas. I remember that case. They always did. Small towns never forget mysteries. She helped me pull the files. I spent hours flipping through permits and dates and signatures. Some pages matched what Jonas had in his boxes. Others didn't. The differences were subtle. A number here, a signature there. But I saw it. Ray had changed things, covered tracks. The deeper I went, the more I felt Jonas's presence not just in the journal, but in every step I took. He had left a map. He had trusted me, us, to find it. And I wouldn't let him down. I also started following Ray, not in the cinematic sense. No binoculars, no disguises. But I watched him. From afar. I noted where he went, What building still had his company's name? I walked by one of his job sites, pretended I was on my way to a dentist appointment, and snapped photos of the truck plates with my phone. One night, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in over 2 decades. Detective Lena Goss, retired now, still in town, still sharp. When she picked up, I hesitated. "Detective Goss, it's Delora Wynne. I don't know if you remember Jonas's case," she said immediately. "Of course I remember." Her voice had that same steel, not cold, just firm, professional, unflinching. "I found something," I told her. Actually, I found a lot. I didn't tell her everything, not yet. But I asked if she'd meet me for coffee. She agreed, said she'd always had a gut feeling about Jonas, said she regretted how the case was handled. That was enough for me to feel hope. I left the journal out one night on the kitchen table. Callan walked by and paused. "You finished it?" he asked. "Yes." He nodded, waiting. I looked up. "Do you want to read it?" He thought for a second, then shook his head. "Not yet." He didn't need to. He saw it in me. The change. I was different now. Not louder, just clearer. Every morning I woke up, brewed my coffee, and looked at the closet door. It was still open, still empty, but it no longer scared me. It reminded me that the truth doesn't disappear. It waits for the right moment, the right hands, the right woman to finally say, "I'm ready." And I was. The silence that had ruled my life for 27 years wasn't a prison anymore. It was fuel, and I was just getting started. It didn't happen all at once. Power doesn't arrive with fanfare. It creeps in, one moment at a time. It was subtle at first, a change in posture, a longer pause before someone answered my questions, a look that lingered just a little too long. I wasn't shouting, I wasn't accusing, but people were starting to feel it. I knew something. And unlike before, I wasn't asking for permission to speak. The first shift came with Ray. He dropped by unexpectedly one Saturday afternoon. I hadn't seen him in years. Not in person. He pulled into my driveway like he owned it, driving that same spotless black pickup, the kind Jonas used to joke was his second wife. I opened the door, calm, hands wiped clean on a dish towel. He looked older, gray around the temples, a little heavier, but his eyes, those were the same, cool, calculating, always scanning for what wasn't being said. "Delora," he said, forcing a smile, "heard from a neighbor you've been asking around. Town records, permits, that sort of thing." I tilted my head slightly. "Have I?" He laughed, but it didn't reach his chest. "Just thought maybe we could talk, clear the air." I stepped aside. "You can come in, but I'm not offering coffee." He sat stiffly at the edge of the couch, glancing at the bookshelf like he was trying to find something to control. I stood the whole time. Let him squirm. He asked about Callan. I answered briefly. He brought up old times, holidays, barbecues, how Jonas used to grill too hot and burn the chicken. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. Finally, I said, "You lied to me. About Jonas, about work, about everything." His jaw tightened. "I don't know what you think you found." I cut him off. "You don't get to gaslight me anymore." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. But my words landed sharp, clean and quiet. He stood after that, walked toward the door like the room was burning behind him. Before he left, I said, "Next time you visit, bring a lawyer." He didn't respond. But I saw it in his shoulders. The first flicker of doubt. He was nervous. Next came Detective Goss. We met at an old diner off Route 4, the kind of place that hadn't changed since the 80s. Linoleum floors, chipped mugs, coffee strong enough to restart your heart. She wore plain clothes, a gray wool coat, hair tied back. She slid into the booth across from me and opened a small notepad. "You brought something?" I handed her a manila envelope, copies of Jonas's journal entries, the construction invoices, the zoning discrepancies. Not all of it. Just enough to stir the water. She skimmed the top pages, eyes narrowing. "This is solid," she said. "Why didn't you bring this to me sooner?" "Because I didn't trust anyone back then," I replied, "and I didn't have it all yet." She tapped her pen once, then twice. "Do you want this reopened officially?" I looked her in the eye. "I want the truth, whatever it takes." She nodded. "Let me dig quietly, for now." And just like that, I wasn't alone anymore. The ripple effect spread further than I expected. I went to the bank next, to close an old joint account Jonas and I had once shared. The teller, a woman I hadn't seen in years, pulled up the file and frowned. "There was a withdrawal from this account 2 weeks before he disappeared," she said. "You never asked about it?" I blinked. "No one told me about it." She hesitated. "It wasn't flagged?" I leaned in. "Should it have been?" She closed the file quickly. "I'll have to check." There it was again, the shift. Suddenly they were the ones unsure. For years I had walked into rooms trying not to cause a stir. Now I walked in and watched people whisper after I left. I didn't need a badge. I didn't need to shout. I just needed to stand tall and carry the weight of what I knew. The story people had clung to. Jonas ran away, couldn't handle life, poor Delora. It was cracking. And once a story starts to crack, it bleeds. Even Callan began to feel it. He came home from work one evening. He taught art at the community center, and said, "Someone at the gas station asked me if you were suing Ray." I looked up from the dining table where I was still scanning documents. "What did you say?" I said, "You're smarter than people think." He smiled then, really smiled, for the first time in a long time. And I realized something. I wasn't just reclaiming the truth. I was reclaiming my name, my strength, my son's belief in me. For decades, people had written me off as the woman left behind. Now they were watching and wondering what I was going to do next. That was power, not revenge, not noise, presence. And in the space where Jonas had been erased, where I had been dismissed, I was now standing steady, unafraid. The tide had turned, and it was only going to rise from here. I asked Ray to meet me at the diner. Same booth where I'd met Detective Goss. Same chipped Formica table. Same burnt coffee I'd never liked. This time I ordered a cup anyway. I wanted him to smell it, to feel the weight of the silence I had carried for 27 years, while everyone around me had quietly moved on. He showed up late. On purpose, I think. Power games. Old habits. He looked like a man trying not to look nervous. Crisp shirt, combed hair, but his eyes were restless, scanning the room like someone might overhear us. "You said you had something for me," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "I do," I said, pulling a small file folder from my purse. I set it on the table but didn't push it toward him. "But first, you're going to listen." He laughed once. Dry. Forced. "Delora, if this is about Jonas—" "It is," I cut in. "It's exactly about Jonas." He leaned back, arms folded, and the mask slipped just slightly. His mouth tightened. His fingers twitched. He didn't like being interrupted. Never did. "I know," I said, my voice steady. "I know he didn't leave. I know he didn't run. I know about the ledger, the shell accounts, the fake permits. I know what he found, and I know what you did." Ray's face didn't move, but something shifted in the air between us. A stillness, a weight. I pushed the folder toward him. Finally. Inside. Copies of the journal entries, financial records, and photos from the crawl space. Not all of it, just enough to confirm what he already knew. He didn't open it. Instead, he leaned forward. "Do you have any idea what you're doing?" "Yes," I said. "I'm finally telling the truth. Out loud." He shook his head, smiled like I was being naive. Jonas was paranoid. He was cracking. You know that. He was always the quiet one, the soft one. He got in over his head. And you took advantage of it. "I tried to protect the family," he said, voice rising just a little. "You think you're the only one who suffered? I was left to clean up the mess." I didn't flinch. "You didn't clean up a mess, Ray. You buried a man." and you told everyone he left." He stared at me, and for the first time, I saw it. Not just guilt, but fear. Not of me, but of exposure, of what I had already set in motion. "You don't have proof," he muttered. "Not enough to make it stick." "I don't need to make it stick," I said softly. "I just need to open the right doors, and I've already started." He exhaled slowly. "You really want to drag this whole family through the mud? What's left of it?" "No," I said, "but I will, if that's what it takes." I stood then, my coffee untouched, my hands calm, and I looked him straight in the eye. For years, I believed I wasn't enough, that Jonas left because I failed him, that I wasn't the kind of woman a man stays for. He didn't speak. "I lived in that house with your silence in the walls, and now I'm done." I walked out without another word. 3 days later, Detective Goss called. "We reopened the file," she said. "Quietly for now. That box in your wall, it's evidence. The tapes, the receipts. They're being reviewed. You did good, Delora." I thanked her, hung up, sat on the porch and let the breeze move through me. Something had shifted. Not in the world. In me. The next morning, I found a note shoved under my front door. No envelope, just a piece of lined paper folded once. "Don't go any further. Let the past die." It wasn't signed, but I didn't need it to be. I laughed, because for the first time in my life, I didn't feel afraid. I felt free. And when Callan came downstairs that morning, I told him everything. Not the gentle version, not the edited one, all of it. He didn't interrupt. He didn't blink. When I was finished, he asked one question. "Do you think Dad was trying to protect us?" I looked him in the eyes. I know he was. Later that night, I opened the closet again. The panel was still gone, the crawl space still visible, the box gone now, in police custody, but the space remained. I stepped inside, crouched down, ran my fingers along the cold wood. "I found it," I whispered. And in that moment, I wasn't grieving anymore. I was witnessing, not just the story of my husband, but the woman I had become, the silence I had survived, and the truth I had finally spoken, out loud and on my own terms. I didn't expect them to find anything else. The journal, the tapes, the forged documents, that was already more than I ever imagined would surface after nearly 3 decades. But then, Detective Goss called again. It was a Thursday morning. I was watering the plants in the sunroom when the phone rang. Her voice was low, calm, but it had that edge. The one you only hear from people who've seen too much and still keep going. "Delora," she said, "we need to talk." The crawl space was deeper than we thought. I froze, watering can still in my hand. She paused, maybe to give me time, but I already knew. Somewhere deep in my body, I knew. "What did you find?" I asked. "A second compartment," she said, "behind the insulation, hidden by a second panel. We wouldn't have caught it without the forensic team. There were skeletal remains, adult male. Clothing matches your description of what Jonas was wearing the day he disappeared." I sat down slowly, knees trembling. "We're doing DNA confirmation now," she added. "But Delora, it's him. It's Jonas." For a long moment, the world stopped. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just held the silence like it was a person. He had never left. Not for a new life. Not to escape. Not even to die on his own terms. He had been in that house the entire time. In the walls, in the silence, in the hollow space I had walked past every day for 27 years. "Do you have any idea how it happened?" I finally asked. "We don't know yet," Goss replied. "But there were no signs of trauma on the skull, and the panel was sealed from the outside. Someone wanted him hidden, not just gone. Someone like Ray." I didn't need a courtroom confession. I didn't need a dramatic reveal. I already had the truth. The final pages of Jonas's journal, the tape where he mentioned fearing for his life, the file trail that disappeared right after he confronted Ray about the forged permits. All of it pointed to one conclusion. Jonas never ran. He was silenced. The investigation didn't explode into headlines. Not right away. Crestfield wasn't the kind of town that liked scandal. It liked secrets dressed up as civility. But this couldn't be buried. They brought Ray in for questioning within the week. He claimed ignorance, claimed he hadn't seen Jonas since the week before his disappearance, claimed he had no idea there was a hidden space in the closet. But evidence has a way of outliving denial. Fingerprints, timelines, discrepancies in old statements. And the detail that broke the whole thing? The padlock on the crawlspace box. It matched a key found in Ray's old toolbox, buried in a storage locker registered under a shell company. One Jonas had written about. It was enough for a warrant, enough for a full reclassification of Jonas's case, from missing person to homicide. Ray wasn't arrested immediately. The process takes time, but his lawyer called my house 3 days later. Left a message saying he'd like to settle any civil disputes out of court. I didn't call back. Because this wasn't about money, it was about truth. And justice, real justice, doesn't come with a settlement. It comes with silence breaking, with the world finally calling something what it is. Callan and I sat together on the porch that evening, watching the light fade behind the trees. He held the photo of Jonas in his lap, the one from the crawlspace. Dusty, faded, but unmistakable. "Do you think he knew we'd find him?" Callan asked. I thought about the letter, the handwriting, the sentence written with trembling precision. "I'm in the walls. Dig behind the closet." "He didn't hope," I said. "He planned." That letter wasn't a cry for help. It was a breadcrumb. One final act of love from a man who saw danger closing in and left a map for us to follow, even if it took decades. The next morning, I returned to the closet one last time. The space was now sealed with police tape. The crawlspace no longer hidden, the wall stripped bare, the truth no longer buried. I knelt, pressed my palm against the wood. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I should have known. But I'm here now." I stayed there for a long time, letting the quiet surround me. It didn't hurt the way it used to, because the silence was no longer empty. It was full of truth, of memory, of a man who had tried to fight quietly and still lost. But even in losing, he'd left a thread, and I had pulled it, all the way to the end. The funeral was small. There was no announcement in the paper, no formal service, just a simple graveside gathering at the edge of Crestfield Cemetery, beneath an old oak tree that had stood longer than any of us. We buried what was left of Jonas quietly, just me, Callan, and Mavis, and 2 plain-suited investigators standing at a respectful distance, there only to confirm the legal chain of custody had been closed. I didn't wear black. I wore deep blue, the same color as the sweater I'd worn on our last real family dinner before he vanished. The night we carved pumpkins and laughed like time wasn't slipping. Callan gave a short speech. He didn't cry. He didn't have to. Every word he spoke came from a son who had waited his entire life to know whether his father had chosen to leave him. Now he knew. He hadn't. After the service, most people drifted away quickly. I stayed. Mavis waited with me, arms folded, her silence protective, just like it had been since day one. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. We just stood beside that patch of newly turned earth, watching the wind move through the branches above. And that's when I saw her, standing at the edge of the gravel lot. A woman, mid-40s, holding a small bouquet of lilies, her posture stiff, her face familiar, though I hadn't seen it in over 2 decades. Sonia, Ray's daughter, my niece. She hadn't called, hadn't written. Not when Jonas went missing, not when Ray was questioned, not during the investigation. She'd vanished into her own world long ago, law school, a different city, a different name. But here she was now, walking slowly toward us with something in her eyes that I hadn't expected. Remorse. "Hi, Aunt Delora," she said softly, stopping a few steps away. I didn't answer right away, just looked at her, my hand still wrapped around the small funeral program. She held out the flowers. "I know it's late, but I had to come." Mavis stiffened. I felt her bracing. Sonia continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't know about the closet, the money, any of it. I swear I nodded just once." "You didn't want to know." She looked down. That was honest. We stood in silence for a moment. The breeze picked up, sending small leaves tumbling down over the fresh dirt. Then Sonia said something that caught me off guard. "When I was 16, she whispered, Uncle Jonas gave me a book for my birthday. A journal. Blank. On the inside cover he wrote, 'Your words will always outlive their silence.' I didn't understand it then, but now I think I do." I looked at her for a long moment, measured, still. "You came to say goodbye?" I asked. She shook her head. "I came to say I'm sorry." I didn't say it's okay, because it wasn't, but I nodded again. Small. Final. And with that, Sonia placed the lilies on the headstone and walked away. No hug. No embrace. Just a quiet, distant closure. Mavis turned to me, waiting to see how I'd react. "I'm all right," I said. "She doesn't owe me anything, and I don't owe her anything either." That was the truth, because forgiveness wasn't about letting people back in. It was about letting yourself step out of the weight they left behind. Later that evening, Callan and I sat on the porch. The sunset was burning low, the light gold and red across the trees. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an old keychain. Jonas's, faded leather, a small engraved plate that read, "Bring it home." "I kept this," he said. "Found it in the crawlspace box." He handed it to me. I held it in my palm. Heavy, even though it weighed almost nothing. "What are you going to do now?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "Live." He grinned, but I could see the relief in his face. After all the questions, all the silences, all the years we were a family haunted by an unfinished sentence, we finally had a period. Not a happy ending, not a perfect one, but a truthful one. That was enough. "You think Dad would be proud of us?" he asked. I looked out over the yard, the same lawn Jonas used to mow, the same porch we once sat on as a family, listening to thunder in the distance. "He already was," I said. "That's why he left a trail." And in that moment, I realized I didn't need anyone to come back. Not Sonia, not Ray, not the town, not even justice in the traditional sense, because I had already reconnected with my son, with the truth, with myself. And that connection wasn't fragile anymore. It was firm, rooted. It didn't need validation. It just was, and it was enough. The house is quiet now. Not the eerie, hollow kind of quiet that used to wrap around me like grief. This silence is different. It's peaceful, the kind of quiet that comes after a long storm, when the air is still heavy, but the wind has finally settled. I walked slowly through the hallway, past the photographs I couldn't bear to take down all these years. The one of Jonas holding Callan in the hospital, the one from our road trip to Red River Gorge, the one where we're all laughing and the camera's slightly blurry because I took it too fast. I used to think of them as evidence, proof that we had once been a real family before everything fell apart. But now, they feel like reminders, not of what was lost, but of what mattered. I stop at the closet. The door is gone. The space is exposed. Police tape now removed. The panel boards leaned against the wall in the garage, waiting to be discarded. I could rebuild it. Patch the drywall. Paint over the seams. Make it look like nothing ever happened, but I won't. Because that space, raw and unfinished, is honest. And I've lived too long inside stories that weren't. I step inside, just a few inches, enough to rest my hand against the wood. It's warm from the afternoon sun, filtered through the hallway window, not cold anymore, not secret. I close my eyes and whisper, softly, just for me. You were right. I found you. There's no reply, no ghost, no sudden wind, just the stillness of a home no longer haunted. That night, I sit on the back porch with Callan. The stars are just starting to appear. We don't talk about what comes next. We don't need to. He has his life. I have mine. But something invisible and solid now connects us again. Something Jonas gave us, not with words, not with presence, but with one final act of trust, the journal, the box, the letter. Jonas had left us a truth no one could bury. I looked down at the small notebook in my lap, my own, blank pages, first entry written last week, the day we buried Jonas. I read part of it aloud. Grief didn't break me. Silence didn't define me. And the truth, when it finally came, didn't shatter me. It set me free. Callan doesn't say anything, but he smiles. That's enough. He knows I've come home to myself. The next morning, I do something I haven't done in years. I walk to the garden behind the house and plant lilies, the same kind Sonia left at the funeral. Not for her, not for closure, for Joni's, for memory, for me. I dig with bare hands, pressing the bulbs into soil still damp from last night's rain. And as I press each one into the earth, I realize this isn't where it ends. This is where something begins, not a return to the past, but a life lived without shame, without shadows, without questions that go unanswered, because I have my answer, and sometimes that's all a woman needs. Just one true thing. Buried, maybe, but never lost. This wasn't just a story about a missing husband. It was about a woman who spent decades buried in silence, only to find her truth hidden in plain sight. If this story touched you, please give it a like. Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real, powerful stories like this one. And remember, even when it feels like no one's listening, your story still matters, especially to the ones willing to dig for it.